Just wait another minute or so to see if we have 11 participants, so maybe we'll wait just a minute or so. Then we'll get started. Okay, we're still at 11. Oh, now we have 12. Great. Should we go ahead and get started, Lon?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Now we have 13 attendees. Great. Thank you for joining us for the December 10th, 2020 meeting of the Marion Community Equity Task Force. We'll call the meeting to order. First thing on our agenda is a work plan review and discussion. We'll turn it over to the city manager.
All right. Hang on, I will attempt to share my screen. Assuming I got the right one.
There you go.
Okay. So what you can see hopefully on the screen in front of you is the draft of the work plan that I put together after our last meeting. Admittedly, this was my interpretation from my notes from what I had taken down during the meeting. I wanted to put together a draft to generate some conversation about what we're actually going to be doing to help provide some organization to it. So started off with what our purpose statement was, the values that we talked about, that we agreed upon to govern our behavior, and then moved into the priorities. And as I looked at the priorities that we had talked about, it just seemed like they kind of fell into three different buckets. Was not intending to make it alliterative with policy, practice, and perception. It just kind of came out that way. So I don't have pride of authorship in this. If there's different terms that we should be using, I'm certainly open to those. And I know from some of the conversations, I also wanted to make sure we had an opportunity here for anybody who wasn't able to engage the last meeting if there are additional priorities that we should be considering. So I wanted to start off with taking a look at that purpose statement. I've got it drawn up here, so if people want to change language, if we don't think that this really encapsulates what we were going to do, I've got the ability to edit it live. So I wanted to kick off the discussion there.
Okay. You want to go ahead and just read it, Lon, and then we'll take comments from members of the task force.
Sure. So the way I had it phrased was Marion's Community Equity Task Force was created to advance the mission of ensuring that Marion realizes its potential of being welcoming to all. And then from there, it just is a transition to the core values statement.
Okay. Any thoughts or comments on that from members of the task force?
Do
you think, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Max.
Realizes jumps out at me. Is that the word you want to use? Realizes?
Said I'm completely open.
I mean,
What's a suggestion you have, Maxwell?
Acknowledges, recognizes. I mean,
Or reaches.
What was that?
Reaches.
Reaches its potential.
Achieve.
Steve.
Paying out your thesaurus, right? I mean, but realizes, I don't know, it kind of smacks to me as, you've got some folks that might be blind to the possibilities. You know, there's a million different ways to interpret the word. I just thought maybe a different word might be
Okay.
more firm.
I agree. Yeah. I think somehow that word has a connotation of kind of maybe being aspirational or optional or, and I think we want to be more proactive and firm.
More firm, yeah, proactive, not aggressive, but certainly proactive. What was
Is it
that?
possible? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut in
No,
on
no.
you, Maxwell.
No, go ahead.
I was wondering if it was possible if we were to look at this in its entirety and not go with just realize, is that what you wanted to say? Because that's what leads us to the one word we're questioning. I mean, if you were to change a few words around, maybe another word would pop up at you that would satisfy what everybody's trying to get at. But
Mhm.
I'm just wondering that, and I don't really have an overall issue with this, but I'm just saying that maybe if the sentence was stated a little differently, a word to replace realize would just jump out at you.
And that kind of goes with what I was thinking about, and that was that it's one thing to be welcoming. It's one thing to be part of the community, stay in the community, be, and like, and I don't know how to say this. I'm not coming up with the right word, but it's like we want to be welcoming and we want to be like
Inclusive.
or like sustainably welcoming, or like we want you to stick around, like so that it goes for like not only people coming into Marion, but it's also for people that are living in Marion. And so it's not just feeling like we're geared towards like newcomers, new people that are finally crossed the line from Cedar Rapids to Marion type of thing. And because that and a word that kept coming up instead of realize for me was embrace. So like we're embracing a culture shift in our thinking. But those are all just random words now that I've said that I don't know exactly how they all fit together. But that was the basic idea.
I think it's a good point.
Yeah.
I was hoping to see something along the lines of like proactively, like we are proactively and authentically striving to achieve this inclusivity, and to your point that it's sustained.
Also, yeah, I think from the sentence I read, we're talking about full potential. We want to realize the full potential, and from the welcoming to all, creating that community of belonging. So that would cover both people visiting and people who are here, but they feel they're included.
So you want to read it as if to say Marion Community Equity Task Force was created, and then we can go back to advance the mission of, but it was created to, okay, we don't want to say realize, created to embrace, created, Kirsten said something good there, but was created to, I mean, I like the created to advance the mission of, but just so we can, embraces is good. What did you say, Kristen? What was that word you used also?
I said proactively and authentically.
Proactively. And Jennifer, what did you say? Oh, you said embraces, didn't you?
Yep.
Embraces.
Oh, and I think I said sustainability. We want it to be ongoing, not just flash in the dark.
And Amal said belonging, which I think fit in really. I mean, so we're kind of getting all of the different words and we can choose which one comes together. Now, I have this is probably a silly question, but I just went on the Marion website to see what Marion's mission statement is, and I don't see it. And so we're referring back to it when we say to advance the mission of ensuring, and so then I'm like, but does Marion have a mission?
Yeah, and for me, when I was trying to put this together, I was wanting to, in a fairly short form, I mean, I put it into one sentence, but it certainly could be longer than that. But just for somebody who wants to know, what's the Community Equity Task Force supposed to be doing? Why does it exist? What is the purpose behind it? So that it was kind of simple, that if people just landed on that page, hey, what is this group there to do for the community?
Okay, so is this something we want to continue to just work on, come back with a refined or revised?
Yeah, if anybody has other thoughts or anything behind it, you certainly can feel free to send them my way and I can take another crack at it. I just wanted to make sure we got the discussion going because, you know, with these types of things, that's just the question we get a lot. How are we going to communicate to the public? How are we going to be transparent about what we're doing? What was this group created to do? And, you know, what do we expect to come out of it?
Yeah, Lon, my observation is and I'm unaware of it as well, is the city probably has a mission statement. Having one and living one are maybe two different things, but in this particular case, it might be that this task force has a purpose, okay? And the purpose aligns with the larger mission to be expressed later. But the only part that I would add in this one is purpose, and I would make it stated in the present, is to advance Marion by embracing diversity focused upon well-being for all. It's
Okay.
probably easier for me to say it in the moment than to remember it later and then send it in.
I'm taking notes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts on that? I think those are all good thoughts, good suggestions, and I think we can continue to work on this to come up with something that truly reflects what we're doing here, so. Okay,
Right. So then the core values, these were the ones that I had written down in my notes that we had discussed at the last meeting. One, starting with be engaged, that if we're going to be involved in this, that we agree that we're going to make it a priority to attend. The second one, I just shortened it to do the work and then described it as recognizing that this will require effort between meetings, especially when we start talking about subcommittees here a little bit later on the agenda. Be respectful, you know, understand that every group member has their own set of personal experiences and that shapes their views, but also acknowledging that sometimes conflict might be part of the equation. It might be part of our discussion. We just want to make sure that it's constructive conflict, which kind of leads into the next one about that it's not personal. You know, the mission we're working on here is to get everybody to the same goal. But we may not necessarily agree on the best way to get there, but that making it about the person and not the core issue is not considered acceptable behavior. And then finally, to expect evidence, that we wanted our decisions to be grounded in facts and address issues that we knew were real and not just ones that might be perceived. So that's where, you know, citizen surveys, whatever we can do to make sure that we're relying on evidence, that's an expectation for the group. So did I miss any on that?
anyone have anything to add to that or thoughts on any of these items?
I'll add one, and it's for your notes, Lon, for sure. And it would be, and it's not really a word per se, although you can find it if you look it up. But I think our opportunity here is to move from me to we. And so the word that I'm going to share here is MWE, MWE. And what that means is that in everything we do, we're always trying to expand beyond self to the collective. What's good for the we. And that is, you might say, being aware of the we instead of the me or we. It's one thing.
Mike, I saw your picture pop up. Were you wanting to say something?
You're muted.
Okay, yeah, I was stuck with trying to work with the mute and unmute. I'm okay. How's everyone doing? So happy holiday.
Good.
Mike,
Yes.
did you have a comment?
No.
Oh, had you just joined the meeting and that's why your picture popped up?
Yes.
Oh, okay, well, welcome.
I was running a little behind.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
It's okay.
Okay, any further thoughts beyond what Al shared on the core values? So Mike, we have a draft here that Lon put together and we're going through with our comments on how to refine it and improve upon it.
Okay.
Okay, so we're on the core values. Okay.
So,
Lon is-
yes, I do have a question for
Yeah,
the
go
core
ahead.
values. When we do come upon and stumble upon disagreements of how we may be handling certain issues on this task force, how do we go about coming up with solutions when we may be split on certain decisions?
I think that that's like, you know, it maybe when we're saying it's not personal, it can also be seen as like we stay solution focused.
Yes.
And so, and maybe with that, then it includes that whole like, we are looking, the ultimate goal is the solution, the final decision. And so we keep a solution focused mindset.
Got it.
I did want to point out though, so in the core values, it says that we're going to expect evidence and not just perceived issues, but then perception is one of the top priorities. And so I'm not sure how that, if it's a core value that we don't use perceived issues, but then we have perceptions.
Yeah,
And I don't know how that's going to play out, but
that too.
Hmm.
Yeah, I could actually, on that one, we could just.
Well,
I don't think you
Could
can
actually
take that
end up-
out if you
Yeah, we could just
have
lop
evidence-based.
the last part of that sentence off.
The perception you're talking about as an impediment, as a symptom, or as an issue, if it's not true, just like a stereotype, this is what we want to address. But at the same time here, when we go about solving the issue or looking into it, we want to be a solution driven. We want to be objective. I think the goal here is not just what I perceive to be without hard evidence.
right. If we're looking at policy changes, for them to be lasting solutions, they have to be fit based on reality and facts. I think so. That's different from coming up with solutions to address perceptions. I mean, we can still address perceptions, but policy changes have to be based on reality. Does that make sense? And Mal, I think that may be kind of what you were trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, some of these things too are going to be ones where the core problem creates the issue of the creates the perception. Does that make sense?
Or the perception is the problem. It might not be the reality. It might be just the perception. We're perceiving there is an issue, there is a problem.
It could be the perception, could be a behavioral issue that is communicated throughout the community, especially for those individuals of color may feel that perception becomes a reality to them,
Yes,
and you go from there. So
yes.
it could be a behavioral issue.
I agree, because my next question was going to be, how do we pursue with what's perception and what's reality? And it's going to be based on the topic itself. I mean, a lot of times that's a tough situation when we're talking perception and reality. What's making it perception?
Yeah, and what I was really trying to get here is, looking at things that address the root cause of an issue. I mean, with everything that you are looking into, there's always a root cause, something that's creating it, whether it's perception, whether it's discrimination, there's something that's causing it. And so how do you make sure that you're actually addressing the cause and not the symptom? Does that make sense? So I'm trying,
Yeah.
fundamental problem. How do we fix that? And not just address a symptom?
Yeah, I have trouble with the one perception here, because I think perception is selecting your position based upon your belief and experience. And we want to honor as broadly as we humanly can multiple perspectives and beliefs. At some point, we're probably going to be really talking about what are our core beliefs? What are our core assumptions about one another? What are our core assumptions about what it means to live in a community? But these are being framed as values on how we're going to operate. And they're more operational values than core beliefs. If that makes sense.
Well, I think that's valid.
Here today because of how the public perceives police officers, how the public perceives the concept of Black Lives Matter, how the public perceives a whole litany of issues where, as Al is saying, it's based on beliefs and mores and things that come based on your background. So I mean, this is for public knowledge. You want to be real careful about how we discuss perception, because that's the reason we're here. And the folks who have issues or are going to have issues will have, they'll say, you don't know what I perceive or how I perceive it or why I perceive it. So, but that's why we're here.
Yeah, so without detouring, maybe aside here, I think if we were driven by a core belief or two, that would help us frame some of these types of statements, because a core belief could be something like, we believe all who reside and experience Marion must be welcomed and feel comfortable in belonging here. We need something about belonging, that everybody is welcome and they belong here. They sense home whether they live here or not.
But that's not what they perceive.
Yeah, and so we got to be committed to something that we're going to reach a little higher with. And I think that mantra exists in the city, but we got to reach for some bold beliefs need to really inform our work. Otherwise, we'll get lost in terms of every micro occurrence that occurred to every single individual whenever it occurred.
But isn't there a different way of looking about it? And I'm looking in terms of whose beliefs are they that constitutes the ones that drive this bus. But the other is that my experience, perception or not, is based in reality to me, on how I perceive that, how I communicate that, how I tell others how my experience was in Marion. You cannot separate the two that easily. We're not surgical masters here where we're able to slice and dice, but you have to look at reality and my experience and perception. And I just have a little bit of problem with the belief that I don't know whose belief it is. I may not feel like I'm welcome here, but the next guy who looks like me may feel like this is the best place that he's ever been and ever will be.
Sure.
So it comes down to what is the perception and what is my experience and interaction in that community that may have me think one way as opposed to another.
Exactly.
You
Well,
know,
and I think Who is-
A belief in this case would be what we believe is what we perceive. And that's the dilemma. And what we believe is what we perceive, and that influences our behaviors of what we say and do. And that's a human phenomena, period. And we just need to recognize it. And I honor that, Steve. I think you hit it right on the head. So,
and I would say here, what I was after is there's the two components. One is we want to make sure that we're gathering data from the community when we're looking at what does the community perceive to be our issues, and everybody's individual stories are going to be a part of that, and part of that the reasoning behind why we're going to address those specific issues. But I also wanted to make sure that, you know, if we're going to be proposing solutions, there's going to be things out there that work and some that don't. And if we're going to be making recommendations, let's look for the evidence and the data to say that if we do this practice, we can actually move this needle, so that there's evidence and research behind some of the things that we might be making recommendations on. And we aren't just kind of saying, well, let's try this and see if it works. But then also, if it's evidence-based, if we do, I'm going to say, if we do a community survey now and then do a community survey 3 years from now, we can actually see that there was a result, that there was an observable change. So that's what I'm talking about and trying to get to when I'm talking about evidence-based is, you know, it's not going to do us a whole lot of good to just sit and talk about it a lot unless we're actually making changes.
Also, we're not talking about individual problem. We want to try to figure out if there is a community problem and how can we aggregate. Yes, everybody's going to be operating from their own beliefs, their perception, and how they feel. But can this individual perception aggregate to present itself as a community problem that we need to make a policy to address? Because when we make a policy, it's going to be for everyone, on behalf of everyone. So we're trying to have a solution that work for the majority. It's not going to be perfect for every single individual situation. It's going to be impossible if you're looking to make sure every single person is their experience or their perception or how they on Marion is perfect and equal to every other individual. That's not going to happen.
The only way that people are going to see things change and or perceive that something has changed, you know, and my customers say it all the time, they don't want stories about things that are happening. They want quantitative numbers. They want numbers. So it's like you say, Amal, if you're going to make a policy, there needs to be a policy that can be backed up with quantitative evidence, as what Lon is after. So you can't, I don't know how you quantitate perception, but you know,
no, you don't.
you know,
For example, when you look at the impacts, because here part of this is going to be evaluating the policy and the impact of the different policies on people So you look at evidence, you look at data, it's hard to measure because those are qualitative, how everyone feels. You could try and survey people so they can tell you how they feel. And then when you look at the survey and those responses, if they're significant enough to represent, or you can make a statement, you say, yes, this represent, I'm confident this represent the population in this group or in Marion. This makes sense for a lot of people because statistically, I can justify and can say that. So this is getting closer. It's not going to be 100% perfect, but it's getting closer to speaking on behalf of everybody because it's hard. It's hard to take it from the individual to the community.
Maybe that's part of that sentence that we're trying to grasp is that expect evidence. Decisions need to be grounded in facts. Maybe the word is in there, and you say qualitative, but you know, qualitative, quantitative facts.
Qualitative.
Quantifiable.
So we value compelling evidence. There's quantifiable and qualitative that illustrate, and really what we're talking about is expanding awareness and multiplying impact. And there are ways of measuring, communicating, and reporting in that manner so that people can actually see concretely, hey, awareness is shifting. And here's how we found out. We use this instrument, this approach, or whatever, and we track it over time. And then the other one would be, are we really multiplying the impact of our work? And what kind of results are we really getting?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use an example just for the group, the kind of thing that I think about when I look at this. If the city looks at our workforce and we're not representative of the community at large, what can we do to change our hiring practices, to reach different audiences, to make sure that we are? And then if we look at the composition, we change those, and we look at the composition of our workforce 3 years from now, and we're more representative of the community at large, then we know what we've done has been working. But if we make some changes and then look at it 2 or 3 years from now and there's not a shift, then it didn't work. And we need to acknowledge that and retool and try something differently. So I just want to make sure as we're embarking on this stuff that maybe it's just me because I'm a numbers geek, but I like to be able to quantify results and be able to demonstrate to people that, yeah, this work matters. We did things, and we can actually show you that changes have happened in the community because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think things manifest themselves through the data. You can get evidence on that perception through the data. If someone says they're feeling they're targeted, police they're targeting them. When you go and look at the police data, you can see if clearly there is the percentages are out of line that the police is targeting a specific group. When you compare them with along with the other groups, you can see that yes, it makes sense that they perceive that way. They perceive police are targeting them. So the evidence is always going to show up in the data.
Well, I don't agree with that, Amal. I mean, data can be manipulated and viewed differently depending on who is viewing it, and you can skew and tell a story that's appropriate for your perception in this case. So I think we need to set criteria and be grounded objectively in how we need to approach it. So you can view the data one way, I can view the data another way. I agree that data is valuable and key, but it all depends on how you view it. You know, if one population is underrepresented and another population is overrepresented, it can skew a view on a specific topic.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so where does that leave us?
It seems
think-
that this is a topic for another discussion.
Well, I think when we get into looking at some of the policy and practices and things that we're talking about for the actual priorities that'll be coming up, I think when we separate into work groups, I think each one of those work groups is really going to have to decide how are we, if we're going to measure this, how are we going to do it? Because to Fred's point, you know, the data can be skewed based on how you set it up the first time. But I would also say that, you know, if you're measuring the same data points, you are still going to be able to see change, you know, even if it's flawed at the beginning. But that we can decide and make those decisions and dig through it on those individual issues and say, okay, this is how the data needs to be corrected so we know we're actually addressing the issue we're really after here. But I think, because when I put these together into policy, practice, and perception, we can't use the same data set for everything. Like the one that I used about city hiring practices, well, police interactions with people of color are a whole different data set. So you wouldn't be able to compare the two and know that you actually made an impact on it. And I also think that in a lot of those cases, the practice will change, the perception's not going to change immediately. It just takes a while for things like that to happen. I mean, if you talk to Chief Kitzmiller, you know, Marion has a reputation for being a heavily traffic enforcement community. But if you look at how many tickets we write compared to 10 years ago, I mean, it'll look like it's fallen off a cliff, but that perception is still out there. So, I mean, there are changes that are made. It's going to take a while for that to really permeate through the community that things are different.
I know I think in the initial meeting, we kind of talked about, we weren't necessarily going to model this after other communities or seek outside guidance, so to speak. But I do wonder, you know, in Chicago, or even New York for that matter, they brought down crime significantly. And that's not, I don't think that was necessarily as a result of putting more feet on the ground or whatnot. I think the stop and frisk was eliminated and the crime went down, or was it the other way around? Stop and frisk was added and the crime went down. I don't remember what it was, but I'm just curious as it relates to quantitative numbers, what kind of policies. We don't have to go down that road right now, but that's just one of those things where you grab policies that are quantitative, that results in a quality of life change for the community.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Al. Al, you're muted.
If there was one statement then that kind of overarched here, it would be, we believe that equity is a process informed by qualitative and quantitative data and an engaged community. Because it is a process. And then that kind of washes over a lot of these pieces but I think we have an opportunity, whatever we do, we can say, and by what method are we going to know that we're moving and making progress that would be valuable information for a community to examine, to really, because it's what the community perceives is really the measuring point.
Oh, you have to have a beginning point to know where you're going. It's like,
Yep.
You don't know where you are until you know where you've been. So if you're going to know where you are and where you're going, you have to have some points of reference, some benchmarks that you're going to use to move forward.
I agree with you both, but the thing I want to caution with this group is we shouldn't necessarily look at things as being transactional, like the changes that we want to go and implement. We want things to be transformative. I mean, so we want things to be long lasting and not just say, oh, we fixed this problem and then 4 years later it pops up again. We want something that's going to be long lasting and transformative. I mean, we can say, oh, we have this issue and go create a simple solution, but if everyone doesn't buy into it long term, transformatively as a community, then we're just wasting our time here implementing solutions.
Oh,
And I don't.
Frederick, beautiful language. I think we could easily say that equity is a transformative process for sure.
Yeah, transactional versus transformative.
You got it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Make it stick.
And that can go into your bullet points there, Lon, maybe.
Yeah, I like that language. And I just figured out how to change my screen, so now I can see all of you again. So
Feeling a little lonely there, were you?
I could only see 4 people at a time.
Oh, oh.
Does that give you enough to come back with a further developed set of core values, Lon?
Yeah. Yes. I think so.
And we don't have to wait till the next meeting to share what you come up with. I think we can share it with everyone and have them respond with any further thoughts or comments on it.
Yeah. I don't fear red pens, so feel free.
Okay.
I'll do another draft and send it out to everybody to take a look at.
Okay.
So that really then brings us down to the review of the priorities. So these were ones that, like I said, I grouped them together into a couple of different areas because they seem to really fall into some different buckets. For me, the policy framework, that's not only the laws that are out there, the policies that departments work underneath, but also the practices that you have inside of the organization. What does our personnel policy look like? How do you make sure that when we are looking at policies that we are looking at them through an equity lens, so that we're not accidentally adopting something that has a disparate impact on certain populations. Police operations certainly fell into that area, and they really have 2 different pieces related to it. The 2 topics that were specifically brought up at the last meeting were profiling and then where to go on potential for a review board. Practice, community policing was brought up, and connecting with youth was brought up separately. I did have in my notes there about having other than official interactions, having officers more involved in the community, but I felt like that fell underneath community policing as well, as far as creating an expectation that you're interacting with the people of the community outside of just the official interactions. And then on perception, I borrowed some language that was brought up at the meeting about the shadow over the police department, being a welcoming and inclusive community, especially the outward facing side, and then visibility of diversity, because several members seem to bring up that if you didn't look like me, you didn't necessarily feel safe in Marion or didn't feel as welcomed. So I was trying to come up with some language about that. But I know that there was also, just from a couple of contexts in between, that I think maybe there were some priorities that people didn't weigh in on. And if this isn't a full list, then let's add to it.
I'm just wondering where training and learning kind of comes in for either specific departments or citywide or community-wide, even just where that kind of falls in regards to policy, practice, and perception, because it's obviously going to touch on all of those, but I'm just wondering to clarify.
Practice.
Okay, I added organizational and community training to practice, Anna.
That help?
Mhm.
I think I guess it's also, in my mind, connected to policy. So what are currently the expectations within city, within police, within departments in regards to training and learning, and then the accountability to changing policy based on either best practices or better learning, whatever it may be, if that makes sense.
Doesn't it fall under a framework for policy decisions and adding the equity?
agree with you, Amal. It probably is just the sub bullet of the first bullet. So what Anna said, awareness and accountability. So
Okay.
which is training and holding folks accountable.
Hang on.
And as it relates to awareness, is there and how does the public know that this task force exists? Or that they should be keeping an eye out for some of the positive things that will result from policy? Or is it just the policy, look out, keep an eye for the policy? Or do we want, how much of the public do we want them to know that the task force is out there? I mean, just the fact that there's a task force at all, I think, is a move in the right direction for perception and for those who have perceptions, negative or positive.
Maybe not necessarily public involvement, but public engagement. I don't know. Or, I guess I think of it as a two-way street, that the community also informs, obviously, the changing perceptions. And we don't just involve them to say, well, we sent you that email or we sent you that survey.
Well, isn't most of the things that come out of this group aren't going to get implemented without the city council? And so therefore there's going to be that day or that time that would engage the community, but we may come back with reports, but they don't become policy or direction until the council takes action on it.
And then can there be more clarification about the bullet that's listed under practice as community policing? Is that more of a clarification of the role of policing or the practice? What is that specifically referencing to the prior meeting?
There it was, I was trying to shorten that, what I've talked about before about what is the role of the police officer outside of their official capacity as far as engaging with the community? How do you build rapport with citizens where in your interactions with people aren't just a traffic stop or aren't just because you're responding to a call? How do officers get engaged and really connect with people on a human level rather than an official level?
Maybe we should change that to police outreach.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, something about like police community engagement or
outreach.
something.
Yeah. Police community outreach.
Yeah. Because I was a little concerned with seeing community policing, because that could also be seen as a very different thing of.
Yes. I could see that going another way, being perceived another way. I get it.
But if you put sub points or bullets underneath those, you would definitely give meaning to it, not just having a one sentence thing, but where you say the practice, or are we looking at trying to define a new policing effort or what? Because that's what, if that's it, then we need to address that, because that would be a monumental change if they're not policing in the way they generally have.
Yeah, and honestly, when you get down into that level of detail, I think as we organize these into our working groups or subcommittees, that becomes what those subcommittees should be talking about and kind of defining. These were ones that I had just recorded, so I can't claim that I own that topic. Maybe I didn't write down who brought up the specific points. So maybe if somebody remembers that was the one they brought up, they could provide some context.
Yeah, I brought the.
You're muted again, Al. You held the mouse too long.
There you go. No. All right.
All right. I brought it up at the last meeting only for clarification of what current state is and future state, because you hear those words, community policing, and they can mean different things. And as things were just getting described the last time, I was wondering, okay, so I just basically asked, are we doing community policing or not? Just for clarity. And while we are in, it sounded like there is a police involvement in some public events. We have not formally adopted a community policing model. Okay. And that was more just inquisitive of what the current state is, a baseline. It wasn't directional.
Okay.
And I think I spoke on this at the last meeting, and it was really from the standpoint of like how you had said earlier, Lon, that it's not that you're only having contact with the police when there's trouble. So that it's not only there because they're providing safety, whatever. They're there maybe. I look at I work in Cedar Rapids, and if police officers are walking around Wellington Heights and they're, talking to people, or they are, how many police officers do we see on bicycles? What kind of activities are they doing with bicycles? Things like that. I know some of the police officers have been playing basketball, or just kind of just having that more casual interaction has been to try to break the barrier between community and police. And so what is it that we do here in Marion? That's really where I was coming at from it. I see a stark contrast between the two, between Cedar Rapids and Marion when it comes to that.
Are we talking about like true proactive police outreach, or are we really just talking about the general police community relations? Because one's very deliberative. If we're talking about police outreach, that's a deliberative action that the police will be taking, and one is just a byproduct of their visibility in the community. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on which we're talking about, or maybe we're talking about both.
Well, as an example, there's one of the officers in the Marion Police Force, a guy named Nick. I'm probably sure you know him. He's Officer Dobbs. Yeah.
Dobbs.
And he seems to be the resident outreach guy right now, as it relates to schools, and even they call them active shooter training. You can call them up and they'll do active shooter training. I don't know to what degree he has any training or understanding as it relates to groups of color or minority relations, or that level, but he is a complete coach and advocate for getting the positive side of the Marion police out there, no matter where it is. So if he's the only, if you had 10 Tom Dobbs out there, there'd be a completely different perception in Marion. So you're probably talking about both, Christian, I would think.
Well, and I wonder if that what you're talking about, Mr. Grant, isn't also included in if we almost copied the policy statement of establish a framework to look at all practice decisions through an equity lens and move that down, then we can think about, as the mayor referenced, then you think about the subsets that fit under the sub groups that will be focusing in on that you apply that in equity lens to the practice suggestions or review, whether it is having more officers that have that community engagement lens or skill set or whatever it is. So I think it's captured in, if you replicate that, hopefully that will then kind of delineate to what we're looking at.
Yeah, I don't know what his, I'm sure the chief of police would be, I don't know what or how Tom's purview is set out there, or how his job description is written, but that would be a base point. Benchmark.
Yeah.
Chief is with us. Go ahead, Chief.
Yep. Am I muted?
No, you're good. We hear you.
Yeah, I've told people for the last year that if I had a whole squad of Tom Dobbses, we'd be a much better place. He's very good at what he does. I think part of it with the community policing aspect, it's a mindset and not a policy, because the most genuine outreach you get is the spontaneous stuff because the officers want to do it. And that goes both ways. I think if we're going to look at what we need to do to get the police to engage with the community, we need to look at what we need to do to get the community to engage with the police.
Yes, I ran into a prior situation like this working with the Flint Police Department and in Flint, Michigan. And what I did was basically I realized that there was such a gap between the police and the youth. And the best way we could go about it was allowing us to do, hey, simple community events, 3-on-3 basketball tournaments, necessarily need no cash from the police, but making it more sponsored by the police, making police as coaches of the teams and interacting with the youth. And what I felt was that was the time that the youth felt more comfortable even explaining to police what they go through. So I think, yeah, it's more what we can do in the community and kind of create events to, you know, kind of be the meaning behind police and community. We can do that through events.
Yeah, Chief, you know, we were talking earlier about perception, and I understand what Lon was saying about making data-driven decisions so that we can measure progress and things like that. Certainly understand that. But we are here because of perceptions. And Chief, like you said, when those interactions can be organic and they don't come across as being, you know, contrived or, you know, with any true necessary objective in mind, goodness happens when that happens, you know?
Yep.
I agree. Okay, is this looking better now with the changes made?
Let me move it onto a separate page so that they're kind of all grouped together again. There we go. I think you can still see them all.
Yes.
And again, I'll send these out. So, you know, if there's more that we need to do to make sure that the language is clear. I mean, I look at this as being one of those forward-facing things that the public is going to look at when they're wondering what it is that we're working on. So I want it to be descriptive, but refined enough to really convey what it is we're trying to do. I shouldn't say trying to do, going to do.
Okay.
So then the next step that I had was really to take these and start to throw it out to the group to see kind of who wanted to be involved on which pieces, and kind of let people select according to interests. You know, from the city side, we've talked about it, that we want to make sure that, you know, we're not overloading the different areas with staff, but there's some where there's going to be natural alignment between the staff. And just for data analysis purposes and being able to do research, we want to make sure that we have some representation on the subcommittees. But beyond that, it's kind of up to people according to their areas of interest, and then starting to figure out what we need to do for work in between the meetings to actually start getting some stuff done and providing recommendations. So
what's your suggestion for how to go about getting people assigned to these?
Well, I think if we break it out into the 3, policy, practice, and perception, we've got 13 people on the group. So we know we can get at least 4 involved in each one. My thought was to have somebody be the lead so that when it comes to convening meetings, making sure everybody's engaged, that there's someone whose responsibility it is to be the coordinator, to get the stuff scheduled and just make sure it keeps moving along for each one. But I didn't have any predispositions on who should be on which ones because I didn't know what everybody's specific area of interest is.
And is this only for the core members, or is it also for the ad hoc or the replacement members?
I think just in the interest of continuity, if everybody's going to be, if someone could potentially have to step in as a proxy, they'd probably want some involvement. And then I think, you know, as you look at some of these, if we need to, if there's outside experts or people that have particular expertise in these that people may want to have come in to talk about particular issues, they wouldn't exactly be members, but we could certainly tap into what they know about how to fix this stuff.
I'm having a difficult time wrapping my head around how these can be 3 separate work groups when I think that there's so much intertwined. Like you can't change perception if you haven't changed practices, and maybe in order to change practices, you've had to change the policy. And so I'm having a really hard time figuring out how these can be work groups. So I don't know if you could maybe explain that a little bit more or
Yeah, I guess the hard thing is, do we want to work on all of these as a committee of the whole, or do we want to break them out into particular areas that we could have people focus in and then bring recommendations back to the group as a whole? Because I would agree, Jennifer, I think there are some overlaps between some of these that, one is going to have an impact on another. There's not exactly a hard line between some of them.
Well, in my mind, there's different layers of what we're speaking to, which is one is specific to policing. So the data that we need to look at, that also then will impact some of the practice recommendations we make, which also is connected to the perception piece of the community. So those, what Jennifer just alluded to, was those are all woven together. And if we're all starting with different data points or perceptions of what do we know from what the data's told us, because I know the Civil Rights Commission has seen some data points that maybe the rest of this committee hasn't necessarily seen. There's the community survey that we don't know what came out of that to then kind of inform this is how all members will be educated with the same starting baseline knowledge to then be able to take action in these subcommittees.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think maybe there is a short-term component and a long-term component to this. I see policy is a priority and something we need to work on first because it impacts your schedule for practice and your work on perception. I see the other two maybe more of outcome after the review of the policies.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like there's a growing consensus amongst the group to start with the policy first.
Yeah, and does it make sense maybe for the next meeting as a group? I mean, if you can email me in between and tell me what kind of data you're looking for. So we've kind of got it. So everybody's kind of got a baseline of what we're looking at as far as the numbers, and then discuss the interpretation of them and then figure out, what needs to be addressed, what doesn't need to be addressed, or what's a priority over one area over another.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good way to get started and then figure out how to divide up the work after that. Does that sound okay?
And I think Amal has already talked to Amber about coming in and presenting the results from the survey, so we can do that too.
And I think before I know that the idea of work groups is appealing because it can get kind of cumbersome with lots of people. But I also feel like each one of us that are on this come with a certain area of expertise. And I would hate to see something not be that when we're talking like that maybe a voice doesn't get heard or isn't necessarily considered within the recommendations that we're making because we have separated ourselves so much to do these work groups. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like, I don't know how well work groups will work with a relatively small group, but it's still going to be large to do it all as one group.
I think if we're saying that we're going to focus on policy first, that probably narrows the scope enough that it's feasible for the larger group to just work on that. If with the number of things that we have on here, if we were going to try to tackle all of them at the same time, because I didn't put relative priorities in here. I just recorded what everybody said the priorities were, but it seems like And again, correct me if I'm reading too much into it, but the growing consensus of the group is to focus on the policies first. And if that's the collective priority of the entire group, then we'll just work on that and then see after we get through those if there's anything else that needs to be divided out.
And it could be that as you're going through that, there may be one narrow issue or task that needs to be further researched or or developed somehow by that can be done by a smaller group and bring it back to the large group. Maybe that's how smaller committees could be involved to make the process more efficient.
Well, certainly if we establish a framework, we want to know, like, what are the 4, 5, 6 pillars that support that framework, and that those pillars are a part of anything we work on. So if there's a point about public engagement, personnel development, research, we'd know what the pillars are, and then that would be replicated at various scales of different projects and tasks. What are the pillars of the framework? So we can generate a focused direction. I think that would help inform other subgroups.
Is it possible to, Lon, to get information on the makeup of the city employees, demographics, men, women, people of color, disability? I don't want to just be talking about the police department. And again, I've echoed this before, but this is not just a police department issue. If you're looking at people, because I thought I saw in somewhere in one of these where in order to people to feel welcomed, you're not going to run into just only city employees. And once you're out and about, unless they're wearing a badge that says they work for the city of Marion, you don't know if you're talking to someone who's disrespecting you that works for the city. And why would the city be branded for that? I was just sort of wondering if we're going to look at this in its totality, I think we kind of need data from that as well.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I know initial focus tends to point towards those that have badges. But there are a whole other host of areas that the city has. We've got a lot of public facing employees. We have parks and recreation programs that involve people from the community. We have housing inspections and building inspections. I mean, there are so many public interactions that we do that you really do have to be able to look at the organization as a whole. And I mean, I knew that the initial focus was going to be on PD because that's what's got the national attention, but there's an awful lot of other arenas out there that that's why I said looking at all policy decisions through an equity lens, because I do think that's something that's been missing.
And would that be inclusive of boards and commissions as well?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so for the next meeting, then we'll set it up so that we can do a presentation of the data that the Civil Rights Commission has already seen, and we'll fold Amber in to walk us through the results of the community survey and then start diving into the policy side first.
Okay, at this point, any questions or comments or concerns anybody has, or anything you want to add?
Like the direction we're going. Thank you.
Me too. Okay, Lon, do you want to talk about future meetings, the results of the poll, all that?
Yeah, Alicia had reached out to the group, and for everybody that was able to respond, the second Thursday at 5 o'clock seems to be a pretty good time for everybody. But there are, I think she said, four months next year where it would have to be the third Thursday. Otherwise, we'd be overlapping with a city council meeting. So if it's all right, I'll just have her send those dates out for everybody so that you can review them and we can get them on the calendar. And I know we had talked about it, about the possibility of maybe meeting more than once a month, depending on if the work schedule depended on it. I think maybe the first meeting in January will let us know, and then we'll kind of be past most of the holidays where we wouldn't have a lot of those personal conflicts. And we can see if we need to meet more frequently than that.
Any questions on future meeting dates? Okay, so it looks like Lon will be sending out a revised version of his draft here. And then Alicia will be sending out the meeting dates to everyone.
So are those still the same as the ones that were sent out? The January through December dates, or are there some tweaks to it?
It'd be January through December. She's on the meeting, so she can chime in if the dates already included the third Thursday in those 4 months where it was.
There was
Alicia?
just one that was April 1st or 15th. And then
Sorry, you guys can't see me. This was originally sent out before we had determined if we want to move the conflicts to the first Thursday or the third. Upon further discussion with conflicts with the Civil Rights Commission meeting that first week of the month, we figured it'd be best to move it to the third Thursday. So if everyone's in agreement with that, I can send out the schedule with the second Thursday, but 4 months will be moved to the third Thursday, if that makes sense.
Hello? Okay,
so that April date would be the 15th instead of the 1st. The
Right.
July one would be the 15th instead of the 1st. Okay,
That's correct.
gotcha.
okay.
Yep.
So Alicia will send that out just so that everyone has the exact dates and there's no confusion at all.
Yep.
And then I think my other question in regards to the dates is more about preparation materials. If we are getting data or minutes or any kind of reading and learning that we have to do in advance, can we still expect those about a week in advance, or will it be kind of a few days before, just so we can kind of, at least for Mike and I, we have to try to process some of that with our alliance as a whole versus just us. And I heard the same thing reiterated at the Civil Rights Commission meeting, that, you know, having the other members that may have to step into a meeting also be aware of what the topics and the agenda items might be.
Yeah, we'll shoot for having everything out that early so everybody has a chance to consume it. And now that we have the stuff set up in the agenda system, it'll make it a little bit easier.
Okay.
And I would anticipate that the January meeting will probably be virtual as well. And we'll just have to see in the middle of January how the levels of virus activity are doing and how vaccinations are going, to see if we'll be able to move more back in person in February.
That makes sense. Especially for something like this, I always prefer in-person meetings, but I think this is just what we have to do at this point. So we'll just do our best with the virtual meetings. So, okay, any other comments, any other questions anyone has?
Thanks for being gentle on my wordsmithing.
Thanks for taking a stab at it for all of us and giving us a place to start. So I really appreciate everyone's participation. And Frederick, I agree with you. I like the direction. I'm really encouraged. I've learned a lot already from all of you. I'm really encouraged about where this is headed, and gives me great hope. So thank you. If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting and look forward to seeing you all next time. And in the meantime, please be safe. And if you celebrate the holidays, happy holidays, and look forward to seeing you next time. All right.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow.
Bye.